Welcome everybody to QB Power Hour. Today is May 12th, 2016, and today's episode is Inventory Assemblies and Manufacturing Part 2. We're going to be focusing on everything that QuickBooks Premier, Accountant, and Enterprise can do. So QuickBooks Pro, QuickBooks Mac, and QuickBooks Online completely out of commission for this episode. We will not be covering any topics related to QuickBooks Pro, QuickBooks Online, or QuickBooks Mac. So 100% QuickBooks Premier, Accountant, and Enterprise, which are the versions required to be able to do inventory assemblies and manufacturing. All right, so this is part 2 of the first episode that we did a few weeks ago, called Inventory Assemblies and Manufacturing Part 1. And we actually did cover a few workarounds in QuickBooks Pro and QuickBooks Online. So if you're trying to do something funky with QuickBooks Pro or QuickBooks Online, where you're trying to make it work for manufacturing, those things are featured on the previous episode. So if you go to my YouTube channel, you should be able to find it, or go back to the email that we sent with that recording link. Now, the agenda for today, we'll talk about QB Power Hour real quick and the host, the CPE process. We'll mention a few upcoming live events, and the topics and learning objectives for today. It's learn how to work with QuickBooks Premier Accountant and or Enterprise editions to process typical manufacturing transactions. So that's going to be the focus of today is a typical manufacturing transaction. And I'll be using one of my personal use cases for one of my clients. I think you're going to like it. It's actually very interesting. So about QB Power Hour, we typically are twice a month, Thursdays, 12 p.m. Eastern. The next episode is actually going to be on Tuesdays, a special episode on a series that Michelle has been doing on converting to QuickBooks Online. So she'll be covering some conversion to QuickBooks Online topics. And then that will be it for May. We will come back May 2nd. Well, we'll be doing the last QuickBooks Online conversion of the series. We'll talk about the tricky conversions like payroll, inventory, and sales tax when converting from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online. And then 2 weeks later, on Thursday, the 19th of June, we'll be doing our first ACE approved webinar, which basically means that if you're an advanced pro advisor, you can get your continuing education credits that are now required in order for you to maintain your advanced pro advisor certification. And we'll be doing advanced tips with bank feeds. So that's going to be on June 16th. Thursday would be the episode that will do advanced bank fees. Thank you very much. All right, so about CPE, again, you have to be logged in for at least 50 minutes. We're going to give you a CPE keyword in the middle of the webinar. We're going to ask for the polling question towards the end of the webinar. You must answer that correctly, and you must be live 50 minutes for us to issue the certificate. Give us about 3 weeks to issue the certificates. As I mentioned, on June 16th, it will be our first ACE Intuit approved course. Not every course is going to be ACE. We're going to point out specifically which courses are going to be ACE. Now, quick upcoming events. Right now, as we speak, is Michelle Long's Accounting VCon. So if you are meant to be there, you are in the wrong place. You need to log out and look for that different link to be in Michelle Long's Accounting VCon, which is today and tomorrow. So if you disconnect to go there, I won't be offended. That's fine. Anyway, we're going to have next week on May 18th, on Wednesday, I'll be having my second episode of Enterprise.Expert, which is a webinar series about enterprise level technology. We'll be featuring QuickBooks Enterprise Advanced Reporting, creating reports from scratch. If you're not registered for that, go to enterprise.expert to register for that. In about 2 weeks, we're going to have actually less, in about 10 days, Scaling New Heights in the Bahamas. If you're not registered for that at this point, I don't assume that you'll register last minute, but if you can, check it out. It's going to be an awesome conference. Michelle and I both teach there, and I'm actually doing a 2-part series on inventory, on QuickBooks inventory. So we're going to go even deeper than the content of this webinar. And if you're not certified with QuickBooks Online yet, go to intuitacademy.com, and there's a free multi-city tour by Intuit to get certified with QuickBooks Online. All right, so that's it for events. Now let's dive into the content. So number one, about QuickBooks features, right? Because right now there are so many different versions of QuickBooks, it's important to point out, make sure that we understand that if you're working with QuickBooks Pro or QuickBooks Online, any of the QuickBooks Online, but QuickBooks Online Plus, which is the one that does inventory, you only have access to basic inventory. You cannot do assemblies, you cannot do multiple units to measure, you cannot do sales orders. Those three are crucial for inventory management. Therefore, if you yourself have QuickBooks Pro, QuickBooks Online Plus, um, and you want to do really heavy detailed stuff in inventory, you're not going to be able just because of those three. However, let me go and dig deep into why you should choose QuickBooks Premier Accountant or Enterprise for inventory and assemblies. QuickBooks Premier Accountant and Enterprise will have access to inventory assemblies, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, which is setting up your bill of materials. So we grab multiple components and assemble them into one unit. Multiple units of measure are crucial. One of the most important things in manufacturing are multiple units of measure. I have yet to work with a manufacturing client that actually doesn't use multiple units of measure. So this is how important it is for you to really, really understand that. And then we have sales orders. We have minimum and maximum reorder points, really important to help you keep track of your inventory stock status. QuickBooks Pro Premier Accountant also allows you to change prices based on a percentage or dollar value above or below the current price or the current cost, right, in batch. So it has a batch price updating feature. And I featured that a few weeks ago on an episode where we talked about just prices. Sales order fulfillment worksheet, extremely important for you to prioritize your open sales orders. The Inventory Center is an awesome place to monitor your inventory that's only available in Premier Accountant or Enterprise. Create POs straight from estimates or sales orders. Really, really important for drop shipments or for special orders where clients, put a sales order in in there, or you give an estimate and you want to go straight to purchase your inventory from your vendor. So it saves you basically a step. It's a great feature. That's a reason to go with Premier Accountant or Enterprise. Then we have quantity availability, which is often called available to promise. That's an important terminology thing because some clients call it available to promise. That basically means that QuickBooks will tell you what's available for you to sell, net of open sales orders and pending builds. And we'll talk about pending builds as part of this episode. And then, of course, price level. So being able to change the sales price based on a specific condition or group of clients, that's only available in Premier Accountant or Enterprise. Now, when we move to Enterprise specifically, there are three specific features that are only in QuickBooks Enterprise, which is building sub-assemblies simultaneously. So we're going to do an example today of an assembly within an assembly. And then sometimes it just takes too long for you to build assembly A to then build assembly B. With QuickBooks Enterprise, you can actually build any sub-assembly under a major assembly just with QuickBooks Enterprise though. So I will show you exactly what that means. And then where use tool, that's for you to replace components across multiple assemblies, whereas one specific component gets replaced by a different component. So let's say you change a particular product that is no longer being manufactured and you're going to buy a replacement one, but that replacement one, it's part of 6 or 7 assemblies. It would take too long for you to manually, but normally right now with QuickBooks Premier, it takes too long for you to go to each one and change that unit being replaced. QuickBooks Enterprise can actually do that. And then the shortage report, very important. That's when you're about to build an assembly and you're short on a few components. There's a specific report that tells you exactly what you're missing, so you can basically create an order from there, right? That's the logic behind it. Now, other than assembly, on the inventory front, QuickBooks Enterprise can do automatic price adjustment based on a predetermined markup or margin. So if there's a change to the cost, QuickBooks will automatically change the sales price for you to have that specific target margin or target markup. You can do subtotals for any numerical column. So if you want to do a subtotal for a custom field that contains maybe the weight of the product, QuickBooks Enterprise can actually add up those numbers for you. And it can also do label printing support. Okay, so if you want to print labels on a laser, label printer, QuickBooks Enterprise can do that. You also have a feature where you have the option to disallow customers from selling a product that's negative. A QuickBooks Premier and Accountant will still allow you to sell negative. QuickBooks Enterprise only can do auto copy ship to from sales order to PO. So that's actually really good for drop shipments. That way you don't have to retype the ship to address whenever converting a sales order to a PO. That was actually added in 2016. You can go beyond the 14,500 limitation of items. So if you're working with larger manufacturers that have a lot more than 14,000 components or 14,000 items, you would have to move to enterprise for that. You can do additional custom fields, and we'll talk about custom fields on this webinar, on this episode. You can do up to 10, and you can also make them drop down. That way, they're not just free type. And also, QuickBooks Enterprise can auto create POs based on maximum reorder points. So we'll talk about reorder points in a little bit. So if you actually tell QuickBooks that a particular unit, you're supposed to have 20 or 200 or whatever, and you have under that, QuickBooks will automatically create a PO for you to bring you up to the maximum level. So that's actually really cool about QuickBooks Enterprise. Now, just to run through these real quick, the other features are also only available in QuickBooks Enterprise is enhanced inventory receiving, which is crucial for you to separate the receipt date from the bill date. Sometimes when we don't use this feature, we convert our receipt dates to our bill dates, and then our inventory gets off because we try to match our bill dates to our vendor's bill date, not to our actual inventory receipt date. So that's actually a crucial feature. You can also find and select search within your item list inside of a transaction. So instead of going into your item list to search a particular item, you can do it within the transaction. You can have an item picture inside of the inventory center. It's only available in QuickBooks Enterprise. You can assign a default class per item. That would be interesting if your client ever needs to run reports by class and the item drives the class. You can search within forms. So if you have really long invoices with a lot of components and you're trying to search within the description, you can do that only in QuickBooks Enterprise. Obviously, advanced reporting, something I've talked about for months now, that's only available in QuickBooks Enterprise. So certain item level reports and inventory reports, QuickBooks cannot do. You would need advanced reporting for. And also added in 2016, you can see the item cost within invoices now. Now you can choose to avoid the client from seeing that, but not doing that. Now, somebody's saying you've been recommended not to turn on enhanced inventory receiving. Karen, and I appreciate that comment. There has been a history of data corruption increase with enhanced inventory receiving versus not having it turned on. However, if Intuit can somehow fix that in future releases, I would still encourage the use of enhanced inventory receiving for you to maintain the integrity between the receipt date and the invoice date. So thank you for that comment, Karen. Now, lastly, the last part of the slides here before we go into the product demo. If you have QuickBooks Enterprise active service plan or an active subscription, specifically the Platinum subscription, you would have access to additional features like advanced pricing, which is a huge improvement over price levels. And I'll be doing a webinar just on advanced pricing, I believe in August. Barcode support, multiple inventory sites, and bin locations within inventory sites. The option to track lot numbers or serial numbers. Okay, that's only available in this Platinum edition of QuickBooks Enterprise, and access to FIFO inventory valuation instead of average cost, because QuickBooks Pro, Premier, and Accountant, which is the example we're about to do, is going to do it all based on average cost. All right, so I wanted to make sure we get that out of the way first. It's an important piece of information for you to know, because when you're consulting with your clients on inventory and they're working on Premier, there may be an opportunity to move them to Enterprise just to manage inventory better. So let me set up the actual use case here. Okay, this is a client that I have that assembles bullets. I don't want to say they manufacture bullets, because they actually just assemble them. So they purchase the components of the bullet and they actually call it a cartridge or ammunition. And the final product, it's basically the bullet itself inside of a box. So we're going to talk about the process of buying the raw components and then assembling them all the way down to the box that's ready to sell. So, by the way, I'm not a gun activist, and I'm not a real gun person or anything like that. I just happen to have a client that assembles bullets, and that's what. So I'm not trying to get political here. So this is just have a client that does bullets. Anyway, all right. So let's talk about the components now. So for you to work with an assembly client, manufacturing client, you have to have a real deep understanding of the components and the process. Okay, so this was a learning curve for me. I knew nothing about bullets, and after working with the client for a few months, and now I understand it really, really well. So the cartridge itself, which is the final, what we call a bullet, but it's not really the bullet. The cartridge itself has four major components. It has the projectile, which is the tip that actually flies out, which that's the actual bullet. Then we have the casing or the brass casing, which is the little cylinder piece where all the powder goes into. And then we have the primer, or I'll call it the igniter, which is basically the part that sparks up, makes the powder explode, which is the one that shoots out the bullet, and the shell casing falls, or the brass casing falls on the floor. So these are the four major components that we're going to think about. We have the primer, the case, the powder, and the bullet. Okay, to make things a little bit more complex, okay, we're going to do a couple of examples here. This client doesn't just manufacture one type of cartridge; it manufactures three types of cartridge. They do a 9mm, a 45 ACP, and a 223 rifle. Now, each of these may share certain components. Like, for example, the 9mm cartridge will share the same powder, the same bullet, and the same brass casing, and the same and the primer as the 45 ACP. However, the 9mm and the 45 have different grams of powder. So we're going to talk about units of measure, and we'll talk about how that affects the assembly process. So just kind of keep that in mind, that we have two units that are very, very similar in size and everything, but they have different powder amounts. And then we have the rifle cartridge, the rifle bullet, which is going to use a different bullet projectile. It's going to use a lot more powder. It will use a different casing and a larger primer. Also, I want to make sure that I do the casing for the 9mm and the brass casing are two different casings. However, they end up having the same bullet. Anyway, so these are the raw materials. So these are the raw materials, okay? So we have all these components, not just the four major components I mentioned, but we also have a box in which the bullets go into, or the cartridges go into. We have a label that we stick outside of the box, and then we have a little certificate that my client just puts in there, made in America, whatever, because these are all handmade. These are all hand assembled, and for some reason, hand assembled bullets in some cases are more desirable than just like massive machine assembled bullets. So because of that, he creates a little certificate, and he commands a much higher price than maybe buying them wholesale or something like that. So I've created a QuickBooks file that already has all these specific assemblies. I mean, all these components. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to go into my item list here. Okay, and then I created a QuickBooks file already with all these components. We're going to kind of dig deep into each of these and see exactly what I did, but I just want to go back to the presentation here. And then let's talk about the actual process. So first, he puts all these pieces in this machine here, right? These are still set by hydraulic pressure by the machine itself, but they're hand assembled from the perspective that they actually put the shell casing in there, and they put the powder, which they measure by hand. And then this machine, all it really does is it's press down the bullet, so it's got the full pressure in there. Now there's three types of cartridges that we assemble, and this is what eventually will be my subassembly. So these are my first set of the assembly process, which is getting all the raw components into a finished cartridge. However, they don't sell cartridges by themselves. They don't sell bullets by themselves. They only sell them in fully assembled boxes or tin cans. So there's two steps to the assembly process. First, we're going to assemble the cartridge, and then we're going to put the boxes together. All right. So The final product at the end will actually be either a 25 unit box of 9 millimeter, 25 unit box of 45, and then we'll have for the 50, for the larger boxes, they only sell the 45s and 50 packs and 23 packs, and then they have this big tin can where they have up to 100 rifle bullets of the 223. So let's go ahead and do the demo. Hopefully, I know there's a lot of information, but it is impossible to explain the process without understanding the details of each component that goes behind it. And again, I didn't know anything about bullets before I did this, and now I feel that I know a whole lot. So let's start with the raw components. So the first thing that I do, this is the first thing that you will notice, is my item list has been organized and cleaned up in a very specific way to make it easy for you to search through your items. So let me tell you what I do first. So let's say we're going to talk about the small bullet. Okay, so this is my small bullet here, and I'm going to double click on this, and there's a couple of really important things, and these are important things for you to take as best practices for your own. Number one, under sales information, I put in the note, do not sell, right? Because I don't want my customer to be tempted to try to sell a small bullet, which is a component that they don't sell. So I make sure that I put there, do not sell. This is a component of a cartridge or something like that. I also don't put a sales price because we don't sell the bullet, the projectile. We only sell the boxes at the very end. Then here under purchase description, I do have, my client has a particular issue where if they buy the boxes that that have 250 units, it costs them 75 cents a piece. But if they buy the bigger boxes that have 1,000 units, they cost 74 cents a piece. Now, QuickBooks does not have the capacity to carry more than one cost. So because there is a potential savings for buying them in larger bulks, what I do is in the cost description, on the purchase description, I actually type it in there. That way my client knows that if they end up ordering the 1,000 unit boxes, they're actually going to pay 74 cents, not 79 cents. But by default, I put the most expensive or the lowest unit price in there because it happens to be the most common one that the client buys. Now, for cost of goods sold account, I put cost of goods sold, and then for income, I put sales. At the end of the day, we don't even sell this unit, so these two accounts will never be affected anyway. Now, the preferred vendor, that's a really important piece. I do make sure that I take my time and make sure that every component has a preferred vendor in there. I will show you there's a real valuable reason why I do that. Now, asset account. I usually always create 3 asset accounts. One current asset called raw materials. This is going to be for all my first line level component inventory parts. Then I'm going to have another one called work in process, which is for all my sub-assemblies. So these are my assemblies that I create before I make my final assembly. And then I'm going to have my finished product, which is the actual stuff that's ready for sale, the actual stuff that's on retail, ready for sale. So those are the 3 that I create: raw materials, work in process, and finished product. So because small bullet is actually part of the component, that's going to go under raw materials. Now, we're going to have the option to put a minimum reorder point and a maximum reorder point. So how does this work? Minimum reorder point means if I end up having less than 500, I want to reorder more. Now, how much do I want to reorder? Enough to reach my maximum, which is 2,000. So think about 2,000 as the amount you always want to have, and think about the minimum as the amount that if I reach there, I have to start ordering right away. Okay. Now, certain clients have issues with lead times, where some components take maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks, 5 weeks to get there. If you have high lead times, you may want to have higher minimum reorder points. That way you don't run into the situation that you just don't have the component and then basically you stop manufacturing altogether. Now, the other really important piece is I make sure that I do take my time and put my manufacturer's part number, and also under custom fields, I always create categories, right? Because it just makes it easier to search, easier to create reports. So I create a custom field here under define fields. I create a custom field called category, and I call this one bullet. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then typically once I create a component, I duplicate them. So for example, if I'm going to create now the large bullet, which is the one that's, where's my large bullet? The one that's here. I typically would have just right click on small bullet, click on duplicate item, So right click, duplicate item, and then I would have just changed the few components that changed. That way it makes it so much quicker for me to be creating the similar components as we go. Now, so I have my small bullet here, my small bullet and my large bullet. Now the problem is because of the natural ordering of the accounts here. I like to see this group by category, and this is where the category becomes really handy. So in order for me to enable that, I have to right click here on my item list, click on customize columns. So right click customize columns, and then I have to look for this category custom field that was normally here on the left side. I'm gonna have to pull it to the right side and then move it up like this to make sure that I have it there in a place where it's useful for me. So I typically put my category, again, I'm going to put this all the way up. I typically put my categories right next to the name. Name always has to be the first one. You can't, name will always be the first one. So I put categories here next to the name. So I hit OK, and that's how I get these categories here. So then I'll click on the header, click on category, and then I'm going to see all my components based on the categories that I gave it. That makes it just a lot more easier to find and visually easier to organize. That's why I find that category custom field to be very, very useful. Going a little bit deeper here, I'm going to go here into powder. So this is my charge powder. This is the stuff that goes inside the shell casing that explodes, that makes the projectile go. So units of measure are extremely important, as I mentioned earlier. For example, when I put powder inside the bullet, we do it based on grams. Okay, if you remember on this particular example, let me go back and show you the components. On the 9mm, it puts 6.5 grams. Okay, however, when I go purchase the powder, my vendor doesn't sell them in grams. They sell it in 20-pound bags. Okay, so what I do is I created a unit of measure set. I'm going to click here and edit and show you how that works. I create a unit of measure set where I have gram as my base unit, and then I created other units. I created the pound itself, and the reason why I do that is because sometimes I may want to count them or adjust them in pounds. And 20-pound bag, it's actually how I buy it. Now, where did these 453.59 come from? Okay, so let me show you something. If you actually Google conversion pounds to grams or something like that, if you Google that, in the results, you would get a quick Google sort of utility to convert units of measure. So in this point, I can go by length. So if I want to go foot to yard, or if I want to go volume, if I want to go gallons to quarts, that sort of thing. So in this case, we're going to choose mass here, and then we'll choose 1 pound. So 1 pound in grams is 453.592 grams. If I put here 20 pounds, which is actually the size that I buy, we're talking about 9,071.85. That number is extremely important because when I go back into QuickBooks, I have to make sure that that number is here. So let's see, this will be 9,071.85. So I'm going to put here 9,071.85. Okay, so when I go buy the powder, I'm buying them on this many grams, although when they're really selling them to me by the pound. Now, how do I come up with pricing? Pricing is extremely important. I got to take this number here, 9071.85, and I have to divide it by the cost of my bag. So when I buy these for $89, but not per gram. I buy that per 20-pound bag. So I have to divide the 89 by the 9071.85, and then I get essentially what's my cost per gram on my unit. This stuff is extremely important. I can't emphasize enough how many people make mistakes in this part because they don't do the conversions correctly, and then their components, they all go out of whack. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Okay, so that was an example on multiple units of measure, an example on the raw components. So as you can see, we have all the raw components here. Now let's talk about, let me delete this assembly that I have here, and then we'll create a new one here. So I'm going to create a new inventory assembly for our cartridges. I'm just deleting my assemblies here. So I'm going to create a new inventory assembly. I'm going to go to item new, and this is the part that really we're focusing on is this portion. Okay, it's creating a new assembly item. So I'm going to go new, and then I'm going to create an inventory assembly. Now, this is going to be, again, this is going to be this cartridge, the 9mm cartridge, as the first assembly we're going to make. So one small bullet, 6.5 grams of powder, one brass casing, one small primer or igniter. Okay. The other piece I just want to double check real quick that because I modified something here. Let me see where's my powder. Let me just go see if I got a bill against the powder. Let me go ahead and delete this bill here. I don't wanna have my cost being affected by it because I just changed an amount on the powder right there and then. So back to where we were. Sorry about that. So item new, and then I'll create an inventory assembly, and then we're gonna call this one 9mm cartridge. Okay, and this is an inventory assembly. Now the asset account is not going to be finished goods because this is not my finished good. This is my work in process. So I'm going to click here, work in process. Then it's asking me build point and max. So when it comes to minimum and maximum in assemblies, it's a little bit different than reorder points because we're not really going to order these, we're going to assemble these. So at all times, I want to have at least 5,000 cartridges available. And then whenever it's time for me to build, I want to make sure that I build to stock up to 10,000. So that's my process. If I do run into less than 5,000 cartridges, I want to start building and get me back into 10,000 levels. That's what this minimum and maximum here means. Now let's talk about the bill of materials, which is this portion here. Okay, this is where we actually put all the components. Now I can do them here in this little box, or I can click here where it says full view and just get a much comfortable screen to work with. So I like to build my bill of materials from here. Again, we're going to build this cartridge. These are all the components. So let's start. The first item in this case is going to be the small bullet. So we're going to put here small bullet. Okay. And the quantity is 1. There's just 1 per cartridge. And then we're going to click here on the 9mm brass casing, and that's going to have 1. And notice I have different casings based on the size of the bullet. Then I'm going to do the igniter or the primer. This is the primer. And then I'm going to do the powder. So I'm going to put here powder. Now this is the part that's really crucial because all these were 1-to-1, but this is no longer 1-to-1. This is going to be 6.5 grams. Okay. So this would actually tally up down here what the component cost of my bullet is. Now there's no information here about the labor costs, right? Or the indirect overhead like the electricity or the depreciation of the machines. None of this stuff is being accounted for here. It could be done, by the way, and only if we have time we'll do the example of that. But for the most part, we're talking about just the raw components. So each cartridge is $1.67. So we'll hit OK. So QuickBooks will load up a bill of materials cost of $167. So what I like to do is I like to take that number, 167, and just copy it here, 1.67. That way I have that as a reference as my internal cost. So that's the reference. Now I'm going to follow suit and put here, do not sell. Okay. These are individual cartridges that we do not sell, right? We only sell them as a box, right? Okay, so there we go. There's my bill of materials. I'm gonna go to my custom field here under category. I'm gonna put here cartridge. Okay. Again, I know it takes a lot longer for you to create categories for all of them, but trust me, it just becomes really rewarding when you're organizing your item list. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. Whoops, I have to make sure that I put an income account here. Click OK. And then let's go ahead, as an example, let's go ahead and build the other one, which is going to be this one, which is the 45 ACP cartridge, which has basically all the components are the same, except that it's a specific different casing and it's got different powder. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and right click on that and click duplicate item. And then we're going to call this one 45 ACP cartridge. Okay, we're going to click on a full view here, and then we're going to change the casing. So instead of being a 9mm casing, it will be a 45 ACP casing. And then the powder itself is the same unit, same component, but it's going to be a different amount. So that's 9.5 grams. Okay, so this has a different cost, 186. So we'll hit OK, and then we'll come in here and we'll put 1.86. So that will give me the cost of that unit. And again, this is also work in process because this is a finished cartridge, which we don't sell individually. Okay. On the build point, let's say we're in the same situation. We want to have at least 5,000, and when we build it, we want to get all the way to 10,000, and then we'll hit OK. All right, perfect. So now we have both of our work in process units, which are our cartridges. Now we want to build the finished product, which is going to contain some of these is going to contain the box, the label, and the certificate that we mentioned. Okay, so let me create a new inventory assembly now. So a new inventory assembly, and then we're going to call this one 45 ACP box of 25. Okay, and then the asset account in this case will be finished product. Now it's extremely important that you pay attention to all these things because the asset account, it's important for your balance sheet, and it's also important for organizing the item list. Now finished boxes, so finished boxes in the cell ready to sell, I want to have at least 100, and then when I go build them and I run under 100, I want to go all the way to 1,000. Okay, so I'm going to go to full view here, and then I'm going to pick the units that go. So we said that this contains one finished cartridge, right? So that's what I mean by subassembly. It's like an assembly within an assembly. So that's going to contain 25 cartridges, and then it's going to contain one box, right? So I have one box there, that's 26 cents. It's also going to contain the insert paper, which is a little certificate that we have pre-printed. And then we're going to have the label, right? So we're going to use a small label for this. So the tin can uses the large label. Okay, so that's my actual component cost of my finished good, $46.87, and hit OK. Now you know why I don't like guns. It's just way too expensive. There's other reasons, but yeah, so we're gonna sell these. Let's say we're gonna go ahead and repeat 46.87 here. So let's say you don't have to repeat the cost here. I like to do it just for reference. And then here where it says sales price, I'm just gonna multiply that cost by 1.5. I guess that's my markup strategy. So 1.5, so that's gonna give me my sales price, and then I'll just round this to 69.99. Okay, and then I'm gonna put here sales. And then everything else should be good to go now. Now, sometimes I sell these boxes by themselves, and sometimes I sell them in cases that contain a dozen boxes. So I don't have to reassemble them because they're not really an assembly. We keep them all in 25 unit boxes, but sometimes my client buys them in a case that comes with a dozen. So what I'll do is I'll create a new unit of measure, and we'll call this count. And then we're going to call this each, because each is my base unit of measure. And then we're going to have a secondary unit of measure for dozen, which is basically 12 of them. And then I'll hit next. And then let's say we sell these by the dozen typically. And then we hit next. And then we're going to count this each dozen. You can give the units of measure any name. I just do this to make it easier for me. So I went ahead and hit finish. Okay. And I'll show you when I go sell these how this works here. So on the description, I'm gonna put $69 per box, and then let's say 69 times 12 is 828, and we'll put here $7.99 per 12 box case. Okay, again, because QuickBooks doesn't really have the ability for me to have multiple prices and stuff like that based on quantities, then I have to put it as part of the description. That way it lets my QuickBooks user, my client, know what is it that they're going to do with the pricing. Okay, and then here I could just calculate real quick what my cost per box is. So $7.99 divided by 12 would be 66.58. So 66.58. This stuff comes in handy, trust me. You'll see in the example. So we'll hit OK. So there we go. There's my finished product, my 145 ACP box. So that's how I set up inventory. Now let's talk about how we actually assemble them. Okay. So when I go into my item list, I'm going to go to reports. I'm going to go into an inventory report. go to inventory and go to inventory stock status by item. I'm going to see what I have in stock. So it looks like I don't have any igniters, right? I don't have any powder and I don't have any igniters. So I'm out of igniters and powders. So if I actually attempt to assemble, which I do here through vendors, inventory activities, and go to build assemblies. If I attempt to assemble, let's say the cartridge first, okay, it won't let me. Right? You see right here it says maximum 0. It won't let me because my lowest denominator in this case is 2 units that I have 0 of. So I can't. There's no way for me to build. If I try to assemble, let's say 100 of these, or let's say 1,000 of these, QuickBooks will say, yep, you can't. Okay, so you got two options. You got market spending. This show shortage doesn't really work. That only works in QuickBooks Enterprise. I don't even know why it's there. It just gives me an error. But if I do try to build it, one of the options that I have is a mark pending, which means I am planning to build these. But I can't build them until I get them in stock. So I'll show you what marking something as a pending build is. So we're going to make this pending. We'll hit save and close, build and close. Nothing really happened. But they are going to show up now in what's called a pending build. So when I go in my item list here, and I'll show you one of my components that I enabled. So when I right clicked and went to customize columns, I enabled this one called on pending builds, okay, which will actually let me know, this is the column here, it will let me know how many of these components are awaiting a build. So it's kind of nice here. I like this, right? So it actually tells me, listen, we don't have it in stock, but they're pending to be built. So that gives me even more of awareness, the fact that I have to order these. Okay, so let me go ahead and order some of those. Let me enter a bill here, and I buy these from Firepower Wholesale, and then we'll do some powder, right? And then remember, we buy these in 20-pound bags. So I'm going to buy 4 20-pound bags. So I'm going to put here 4. And notice that because I got multiple units of measure, it tells me, are you buying 4 pounds? No. Are you buying 4 grams? No. Are you buying 4 20-pound bags? Yes, that's the correct one. So I want to make sure that I have all that stuff correct, right? And these are supposed to cost $89 per 20-pound bag. Okay, so it's very, very important that we don't have any confusion here. So I have 4 20-pound bags that cost me $89 each, right? So this multiple units of measure becomes very, very confusing if you don't have those conversions set up correctly. Okay, let me get a large igniter. Let's get 1,000 of these. Okay, so we're gonna put 1,000 each, right? So there's 1,000 igniters, or I would have one box of 1,000, right? In this case, if I look at my description, it says that they come in 100 unit boxes. So I'm gonna put 10 in this case, 10, and I'll pick here 10 1,000 unit boxes. That would be, let me just make sure that this is not confused here. This would be, let me just do 1,000 each to avoid any confusion here. Yeah, let's just do 1,000 each, and these are 21 cents a pop. And then let's do a small igniter, which again, they come in 100 boxes. So I can pick 10 100 boxes. There we go. So that should be $15 per unit, or $15 cents per unit, or $50 per unit. That's actually accurate. Okay, so we have our multiple units of measure here. We have 1,000 units, 10 100 pack boxes, and that's fine, right? I could have picked units there as well, but let's just say that's how I did it. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close. So now I should have inventory, right? I should have some on hand. So now I should be able to assemble these. So let's go to reports, inventory, and I'm going to go to pending builds. Now, the only reason why I'm doing it through pending builds is because I created it as a pending build in the first place. If I had canceled that, then I would have to just create the assembly. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that pending build. And now it tells me here, based on what you have, right? And this is all based on, like, for example, based on my brass casings and based on all my different units, I can build 1,000, but the maximum you can build is 381. So let's say we're going to put 380. So I'm going to send an order to my warehouse to go ahead and build 380 of these. Okay, and it has to do with quite possibly the amount of grams that I have in stock or something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and hit build and close. Okay. And that should go away from my pending bills report. And then I'm going to go into my cartridge. Where's my cartridge? So I should have, let me just double check to see how many I have. Double check which is the one. Did I do a 9mm or let me just double check. I don't remember which is the one that I built. So let me see. There is my 9. Let me try this again. So let me go to vendor, inventory activity, build assemblies. Okay, so I'm building a 45 ACP cartridge, and I build 380. So I'm going to click here where it says remove pending build status. That's the part that I had forgotten. So I'm going to click on remove pending build status and then build and close. Now I should have, because that's the one part that I have forgotten. So right here where it says on hand, I should have 380 cartridges. So now I want to build a box of 25. I'm going to be limited on how many boxes I can build because I don't have that many of these components. So I'm going to do one more build. So I'm going to go to vendors, inventory activities, build assemblies, and then I'm going to pick now my finished product, which is this one right here, finished product. And it tells me here how many full boxes of 125 I can build. So let's say, look, it looks like I can build 15 of these. So I'm going to go ahead and build 15 of these based on the components that I have available. And then I'll hit build and close. So now I should, it looks like I have 5 loose bullets or 5 loose cartridges there that I can't build yet. That's why I had that fraction that was available to build. And that's just going to sit there. I'm going to have that in a bin somewhere until I'm able to build some more. But I do have 15 45 ACP boxes available. So then when I go to sell these, we'll go to customers, let's say create invoice, and I'll select my finished product. You see how all these say do not sell, do not sell, do not sell. I probably should have put do not sell on this one as well. But this is how we can visually just prevent the user from picking any of these components that we never sell. So I should have done it on this unit as well, and this may get confusing. So if somebody is confused, you know how QuickBooks users are, they'll get confused and they'll sell the wrong thing. So that's why I like putting that do not sell tag in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that in there, and let's say I'm gonna sell him a dozen. Okay, so if I am gonna sell him a dozen, we have to make sure that the original price that we put was $69 per box. So this is saying 939, I mean 839.88. So I'm going to use the reference that I see here. So I can put 799 and then hit tab, and then QuickBooks will now charge 799. I'm not sure why I did that, but see 799.99. It will charge 799.9, whatever that fraction is, for the dozen. So if the client is buying them by the dozen, I will do it this way. Otherwise, let me go ahead and just delete that line. If the client was just buying, let's say 12 units, then I would just put 12 boxes. There you go. And then I can just put, instead of the dozen, I would put each. So I'm buying 12 dozen each. And then at this point, I could manually change the price and put 66.58. So that's the usefulness of having it in the description. Unfortunately, there's no way to program QuickBooks to manage multiple pricing and stuff like that. But this is all the type of things that you're going to run into when you do manufacturing. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save and close. So I'll actually have to pick a customer, of course. Pick a customer here and customer, save and close. Okay, and now I should only have 3 finished boxes in stock. Now, one of the things that I'm not a big fan of is that both work in process and finished products are part of assembly. So sometimes it makes it a little tough for us to pull a report that only shows the finished product. Okay, this is why I like doing those custom fields. I was talking about this custom fields here. This is what I like about doing this custom fields here, because that way I can use the custom fields for that. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a category, and we'll call it finished. Okay, and then we'll hit OK. And then once I'm in this report, I'm going to go to customize report, go to filters, And then I'm going to go down to category, which is that custom field that we used. And I'm going to put finished in there, and then I hit OK. And now I have on my inventory evaluation report a report that only shows me finished product. Okay, so that asset value of $200 should match my balance sheet. So if I go to my balance sheet, it should match my finished product balance sheet, but sometimes I want to see the actual components that do that. So that's why it is so crucial for us to use that custom field. Okay, now with QuickBooks Premier, unfortunately, um, you the custom fields is something that you have to type in there. So if you're not careful and you misspell finished or shorten it to FN or something like that, then when you try to pull the report, it's just not going to work really well. So if you're working with QuickBooks Enterprise, which is one of the features I had mentioned earlier, you could set up a drop-down box. That way, there's no way your client can fail or yourself can fail on doing that in there. Now, the other kind of workaround that I have for this is typically when we manufacture, we really don't purchase these from a product. We don't from a vendor. We don't purchase assemblies from a vendor. What I'll do is I'll hit this little checkbox that says I purchase these from a vendor, and then under preferred vendor, I'll create a preferred vendor called finished product. Now, obviously, I'm never going to buy from that preferred vendor. That's not really a real preferred vendor. But the reason why I do that, I'll show you. It's really valuable. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Is when I go back into that report, let me go to customize report, filters, and I'll get rid of this category here. I'm sure some of you know where I'm heading with this. If I go to customize report, filters, and I go down to my preferred vendor, okay, which is one of the filterable items here. If I go to preferred vendor, then I can pick this preferred vendor that I'm only using for the purposes of running this report, and then hit OK, and then I can run the filter like this. The other reason why I like setting up preferred vendors, even on components, on finished products that we don't really buy from outside vendors, is because there's another report here called inventory stock status by vendor. And this would actually group these, okay, based on the vendor. And if I don't have a vendor for finished product, they won't show up on this report. Same thing with these two working processes here. See, they show up under no vendor. So this is why I like to edit these. Let me go into my item list again and make sure that the cartridges also have, I'm going to click on this little checkbox, make sure these also have a preferred vendor, which I'm going to call it work in process. And then I'll go to the next one and also click on this little checkbox that says I purchased these from a vendor and put here work in process. Again, we normally don't purchase things that we manufacture from vendors, just the components. But what's nice about this is then when I get into this report, I will have a whole group here for work in process. So I could essentially run pretty nice reports based on preferred vendors and give me a good understanding on, what do I have in stock based on the preferred vendor or maybe the category type with the filters. So that's why I really like using that. Okay, let me go ahead and close that and close that. Okay, so we're almost on top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and run the polling question and then answer any additional questions that we may have. So let me run my polling question here for people that need their CPEs. And there's a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to figure out if I can actually answer any of them. If somebody says, if somebody says, would you filter by account, like inventory asset, work in process, or finished goods, would you filter by account instead of filtering by custom field or by preferred vendor? So Richard, no, the problem is if you report if you filter by account, it doesn't work. That particular report just doesn't work. So Richard, that's why I did it like that. Let's see. Somebody says, would you do assemblies for restaurants? No, definitely not. This is only for finished goods that are being assembled, right? Restaurants can't really do that. Let me see. Somebody says custom fields. Why do you prefer using custom fields instead of parent items? Oh, good question. So Karen saying, why wouldn't you use an item called work in process and then the sub item and then an item called, you know what, honestly, I don't like sub items. I find sub items to be confusing, hard to work with. And if you're in multi-user mode, it's hard to move things out of. I think custom fields have a much powerful purpose, Karen. But yes, you could use items and sub items essentially to create these categories. I've done that before, but I found custom fields to be a lot better. Let me see. Somebody says, why would you track your labels instead of just expensing them? Okay, well, that's a fair assessment. I'm trying to have a good deep understanding of what my entire component cost is. Yeah, you could expense them, but the problem is that you may not get the true understanding of. So what I'll say to that is, if your client or yourself as the QuickBooks user is going to price the unit based on cost, we're going to say we're going to take cost, multiply it times a markup, and come up to that. So if that's going to be the case, and you omit certain things because they're essentially small and take them straight into expense, you may not calculate that price and that margin correctly. So I prefer it for margin, for the actual margin purposes. Do that. Also, if you're going to pay commission to salespeople by profit, you don't want to accidentally have a lot more profit there than you should. Um, so that's kind of, let me see, what other question I have. What about unit of measure set for sub-assemblies? Yeah, you can have, good question, Karen. So you could have a unit of measure set for sub-assembly. So I could essentially have the specific, so let's just do that example here. So there's my sub-assembly, which is the cartridge. So yeah, I could have multiple units of measure. So I could just do a count here, and then I can have an each, and then I can have 25 pack, 25 pack, and then I could essentially just group the sub-assemblies by 25 units. Yes, I could do that. And then when I go assemble them, let me just show you what she means by that. So when I go assemble them, where's my box? There's my box. When I go assemble them, I don't have to put, I have, 25 units. I can just put, I have one 25 pack. So yeah, that could work as well. Yeah, so that could work as well. You can have, one 25 pack instead of 25 units. That could work also. Whoops. 25 units. In some cases, I don't know. I haven't had a use case where multiple units of measure in sub-assemblies work. And then somebody says, if you mess up on the unit of measure, can you go back and make corrections? Yes, but you have to make sure that all your components are fixed and all the bills and item receipts have to be fixed as well. Somebody says, what about applying overhead? So what I'll do is, because we're top of the hour, and I think that we may be able to do more examples, maybe with QuickBooks Enterprise, is that my goal was to have a third edition, a part 3 of manufacturing, where I use QuickBooks Enterprise, and we'll talk about some of the features in QuickBooks Enterprise for manufacturing. So what I'll save overhead and labor calculation for that, because that's actually really, really complex. So we'll save it for that. Anyway, as we wrap up here, our next webinar will be next Tuesday. Michelle will be doing, the topic will be more QBO conversion. She'll be talking about some use cases and some examples of QuickBooks Desktop to QBO conversion. Then we're going to be off for the rest of May because we're going to be in the Bahamas. And then June 2nd, we'll be doing tricky QBO conversions. We'll talk about payroll, inventory, and sales tax issues when it comes to converting. On June 16th, not June 19th, I made a mistake everywhere. On June 16th, we'll be doing advanced tips in bank feeds, and that one will be ACE. And then don't miss next week's webinar on enterprise.expert for custom reports in QuickBooks Advanced Reporting. Anyway, thank you for joining us today. In LinkedIn, you can join Michelle's group that has 167,000 members, or our Facebook group that I monitor quite a bit, QB Power Hour, that has about 2,000 members. So let's continue the conversation, ask the questions there. I appreciate the feedback. I think you should get a feedback question at the end, and then hope to see you next week on Tuesday. Thank you very much.